Ba ba bum, 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 ba ba bum. All good sword and all trusty and the merry art and true. King of James's men shall understand what Cornish lads can do. And have they fixed the where and when, and shall Trelawney die? His 20,000 Cornish men will know the reason why. Shall Trelawney live, and shall Trelawney die? His 20,000 Cornish men will know the reason why. Oh, spake the captain brave and bold, a merry wight was he. In the London Tower Michael's hold will set Trelawney free. We'll cross the Tamar land to land, the Severn is no stay. With one and all on hand in hand, and who shall bid us nay? On shall Trelawney live, on shall Trelawney die. His 20,000 Cornish men will know the reason why. And when we come to London Wall, a pleasant sight to view. Come forth, ye cowards, all his men as good as you. Trelawney's he's and keep, and hold Trelawney he may die. Oh, 20,000 Cornish bold will know the reason why. On shall Trelawney live, and shall Trelawney die. His 20,000 Cornish men who'll know the reason why. Does Burger King do anything these days but make pretty patties from sponge? Boy, food dies, yum! Facebook keeps showing me the most beautiful pictures of orchids, despite the fact that I've never really been into orchids, and I've never liked an orchid page, and I'm more interested in trees and bromeliads and air plants. I wonder what it's trying to tell me. Orchids are actually a very valuable business. They are the hardest plants to grow because they're hemiparasitic, meaning that you need to have a fully established environment for the enzymes that allow it to thrive to be in proper order. It's not easy. But nothing in life worth doing ever is. But maybe I should get into orchids. Ayn Rand is like a psyop against female writers. You could have the most beautiful, poetic thought ever inked. And nope. This antisocial secretary lying out of her teeth, living off of welfare at the end of her life. That's the most popular woman writer. Sorry about that. Would not have been my choice. One of the biggest failings of the English language is how close the words aesthetic and ascetic are. As aesthetics are surface level, shallow, skin deep sort of observations or, alignments, aesthetics, the show of it, the histrionics. Whereas ascetic, A-S-C-E-T-I-C, that is actually about mortifying your more surface layer in order to become more in tune with your deeper layer. So it's like polar opposite, and yet they sound almost exactly the same. Aesthetic and ascetic. Sounds almost exactly the same, even though they're spelled quite differently. I think it's a huge failing of the English language. The English language is pretty good,
But that right there, that's a huge failing of the English language. I don't think French would ever do something like that. I don't know. Maybe it would. Just a thought. I think it's really funny that we spent so much money on aircraft carriers, and drones have just ruled them completely obsolete. And that's the reality that has been, you know, in existence for a whole decade now. And it's one of the reasons why when Trump first got into office for the first term, apparently he said, the soldiers, they came, they talked to me, they said, we're all out of bullets. Obama never gave us any bullets. We don't have any bullets left. We're all out. And I think a lot of the reason, I think that's actually true, but I think a lot of the reason for that is specifically because it's not really viable anymore. The power projection of a navy is something that was big during World War II with, you know, the Japanese Yamato and like the Lusitania and stuff like that. Nowadays, it don't really mean much. Like, quite literally, with the technology as it is, you can have literal homeless people, Houthis, Hamas, whatever, what have you, that are taking out, you know, multi-million dollars worth of equipment just because they have the technology. And yeah, you also can't deny the fact that the more technologically advanced the first world gets, the softer it gets as well. You cannot deny that after all that we know in the last 40 years about how technology affects us psychologically. It literally does. Like those homeless people, those guys living out in the desert, those guys crawling around in tunnels, they're hardened through the school of hard knocks. And we Americans, we live at the top of the hill, flushing all of our garbage down to the valley. Well, the people in the valley got a lot more ingenuity. You know, they know how to make $1 out of 2 cents. Whereas all we seem to know is consume and then produce waste. And that's a serious problem. I'd say that's probably the number one thing that we should probably tackle, given the fact that, you know, the buffet is starting to get a little slim pickings, you know what I'm saying? That's the post-World War II prosperity bubble was extended artificially as valiantly as they possibly could have. And I'd say the Cold War itself is a much better path than just creating more war in that, like, 20 years in between the Vietnam War and Afghanistan. I'd say that that's a more venerable path, but at the same time, it was all the Cold War itself. Vietnam and Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, Syria, Libya, Yemen. All of this is an attempt to continue the post-war prosperity bubble when itself has become adulterated and warped and is no longer something that normal Americans actually get to enjoy. So, you know, it's a thing. Like, modern warfare, I've been saying this for a long time, is a terrifying, depressing thing. And all the people that have made us military equipment, spears and rifles and other things like that, who oftentimes trace their lineages back to, like, really awful people. All these guys that have convinced us, yeah, you fight your way to a better future. These tools are more superior than your opponent's tools. You are superior to your opponents. Fight your way to a better future. All of those have been steps towards where we're at right now. That's why I say the Cold War is a pretty venerable way of extending the post-war prosperity bubble, but that was an active hot war in Central America. That was an active hot war in places like Lebanon and Iran, and the Iran-Iraq trench war. Like, our military equipment was going to these wars in the third world. You got Korea and Vietnam, but you also got the Philippines, and nobody ever talks about the Philippines, where they invented waterboarding. Nobody talks about that. And Operation Phoenix and stuff like that. You really need to talk about that a little bit more in the context of where we're at today and as regards to the military. I think that would behoove a lot of scholars, as long as they're not doing it, like, you know, without tenure, because then you're putting yourself in a tough position. You're basically laying your head on the chopping block. I think it's really funny. We spent all this money on aircraft carriers, and we just keep feeding Top Gun planes to the Red Sea. Oh, it's a hungry boy. Here comes the plane. Like, we have a bunch of Gen Xers shot calling on these things, and some barefoot Yemeni is just repeatedly poning them until they achieve a logistical victory, and Trump is forced to ink a peace deal, as any good leader would. Oh, man. I would have never guessed when I was young and my dad showed me a little plastic bulb that created a blue light, saying, "This thing takes next to no energy to operate," that I'd ever see LEDs turn into one of the most annoying things to ever exist. I also think it's hilarious. Remember the Musk headlamp light show? I think this was on the inauguration. Um, they surrounded people with cars, Teslas, and then these Teslas with bright, piercing bright, blue-white LEDs started flashing in like a ring, and then flashing brights, and then back and forth. And all the people standing in this area that were given a light show — that's not what a light show is somebody that knows about EDM and has spun poi and stuff like that, knows a little bit about the scene from back in the day. That's not a light show at all. A light show is like, you have your higher level light show, which is literally lasers above you and around you, that don't damage the eyes. There is also some UV bulbs that were flashed on people going to an NFT party, like a Bored Apes Yacht Club NFT party. They went and they had a light show done with UV bulbs, and they all received like first-degree burns on their retinas, like permanent loss of vision and extreme pain and feeling of their skin burning because they had sunburn from the UV light. That's also not how you do an EDM light show. The lower quality EDM light shows, the higher ones, are like real lasers going out into the sky, and like maybe even drones these days. The lower quality light shows are like you have a screen and it has like a 3D projected semi-fractal image cycling through other fractals and stuff like that, or just like moving a head around so that it looks — that's what a light show actually is. They surrounded people with Teslas with LED lights and like flashed their brights at them from point blank range, and they very likely blinded, unenjoyably blinded everybody surrounded by these Teslas. Now, the thing about light shows is when people are on MDMA or other types of those categories of empathinogenic drugs, colors are vastly emphasized. So the colors, the greens and the blues and the reds of the light show, that's what actually people enjoy. They were just flashing white lights on them. White light stimulates the brain. It actually is a negative towards your baseline. And as just a normal person, whether they're high or whether they're sober, they get super bright LED or fluorescent lights, which are usually a paler light than a incandescent bulb, flashed at their eyes. Their brain becomes more hyperactive, and that actually causes anxiety. It's a negative stimulus. It's exactly why they put super bright LEDs in prisons, which, mind you, all throughout Florida prisons, they're doing this to people. It's not just CCOT. It's all over the world, and mostly Latin America, the Mason-Dixon line. In Dixon, in the South, Dixie, there is basically no human rights. And, say what you want about what a human right is, the way that people are treated in the South is horrendous, especially in jails. And the jails and prisons do sometimes blast severely mentally ill people with lights 24/7 in order to create an even more insane person and then inflict them on a population that's misbehaving in their particular controlled environment. That is something that happens probably every single week or every single month. And every single day, every single minute of every single day, there are people being tortured with 24/7 light, which is a genuine torture. And if you haven't been through that, it's easier for males because males can take their shirts off and tie them around their eyes to sleep. It's very hard for women. And oftentimes, like there was a woman from Texas who was flying over to see her son off, who was going to the military. She was wrongly detained in Florida, South Florida, and she was thrown into a cell where they kept the lights on her 24/7. They blasted heavy metal music. This is probably very likely the same exact people who had made the calls to do that came from Guantanamo Bay, just like Guantanamo Ron, the governor. So this torturing people with loud noises and lights thing isn't just like a domestic thing. It's also a private, institutionalized thing. The jails are basically public. So it's like a state-run institutionalizing thing. And institutionalization also happens to children. Children are also blasted with super high lights. When I went to jail, I was surprised with how similar it was to school. Very, very similar to school. Surprisingly, shockingly similar to school. Especially the poor choice private school I went to, believe it or not. Like the public school I went to and the private school that I went to, drastically different. The private school was like nuts, institutionalization factory. I recognize this in hindsight. Full of cliques, full of pricks. Like even the teachers were awful. Anyways, that's a little aside. I thought it was important to note in reference to that weird little thing that, like, Elon is the word pathetic doesn't quite describe it, right? Because he's like a gigantic balloon in the sky. He's huge. Of course, it's all hot air. But at the same time, you'd be lying if you said it wasn't up there, right? So despite the fact that it's not accomplishing anything good, and it probably will never accomplish anything good, it's still there. It's still an artifact. It's still a pressing factor of life for everybody, and he will continue to be until he eventually overdoses on ketamine or gets really sick or something like that, which, you kind of hope happens soon. You don't really wish, I at least can speak for myself, I don't really wish negative on most people unless they're like pedophiles, active pedophiles, stuff like that. People who actively making people's lives worse and children's lives worse, people like Benjamin Netanyahu, you could say that you wish that they would die as soon as possible, right? You're not God. You can still hope for it. Kind of hope that with Elon Musk, I genuinely do not believe, I would put it like less than 1% that the guy reforms into some sort of a hero or like somehow magically turns into a genius after being so self-convinced of his own genius, but actually having like very visibly malformed features. Like his physical body is malformed. So his brain is also malformed from whatever the heck happened to him in vitro, which is as a little fetus baby. And growing up, you're exposed to I was supposed to be 6'2", got on ADHD medication for 7 years. I'm 5'11", 5'10". It's whatever. It's fine. To be severely malformed, say that your parents were like first cousins or whatever, because it's small. Pretoria is a small place. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, no, that guy is give Igor, Dracula's assistant, $1 billion, and you'll probably see very similar stuff popping up there. The little hunchback guy, Igor. You'll probably see very similar stuff popping up there when it comes to very pathetic and strange behavior. Gen X is great, though. Gen X is great. Boomers ruin the economy, and millennials ruin the culture. Gen X is cool and hip, and they have work ethic and fire in their bellies. A real piss and vinegar generation. Real movie stars. I hate Gen X comedy. It's entirely reliant on the tension between members of their audience, black and white, men and women, gay and straight, etc., etc., etc. When real comedians are spending hours and hours and hours training their voices, training their facial muscles, sometimes doing this, standing in front of the mirror for hours and hours, training themselves. Some of the funniest comedians are the ones that can do really good impressions and slot them in to apropos jokey situations. That's some of the best comedians that have probably likely ever existed, and it goes into drama in general, which is entertainment with your body, voice, and aura. And like the ones who practice more instead of just lowest common denominator stuff, which is most of Generation X's culture in general is lowest common denominator on the history books. On the history books, the entire history of humanity, Gen X is lowest common denominator behavior. I don't want them to be, but that's just what they're saddled with. Being so heavily exposed to Hollywood, being so heavily exposed to the news, being so indoctrinated by the fact that they were comfortable when they went to school, when they went to college, and then continued to be comfortable up until around, 2003 to 2008, that general area, when they were already adults. We millennials were children. We were coming of age when things were going downhill. We weren't comfortable when we were being indoctrinated. We also have social media that is a far more effective tool at sharing information than anything anybody throughout history has ever had. And that's actually that's the only reason why millennials aren't as so negatively impacted by the culture. And there's also the fact of the matter is that 9/11 was a key turning point in American history where you weren't comfortable anymore. You weren't so happy anymore. Some people could maintain enclaves, but the general zeitgeist of America was changed forever. And that's it. That's where that delineating line is. That's where those, borders stand. Excuse me. A lot of good comedians self-depreciate in a way that does not come off as sad and pathetic. I'm genuinely striving to tell a joke that's funny, but people feel uncomfortable saying, not just something that people feel uncomfortable saying that isn't funny, which is a big thing that millennials do suffer from. Like, we do say things that are awkward, but not really all that funny. That's our big failing, is that we're such nerds and dorks, and that a lot has to do with the fact that we're so plugged into the internet. As I said, when my discussions about what makes Generation X good comes up, I go, they're plugged into the real world. The boomers, they're starting to, more and more, they're plugged into the TV. They're starting to kind of like, move on. And the millennials are moving in, whereas the Generation X are the ones making the shots, calling it, and operating at the moment. Millennials, they're super plugged into this artificial realm that simulates everything, simulates all the dopaminergic, serotonergic, oxytocinergic interactions that people have with each other. It completely simulates it. Simulates going outside, simulates, anything on the internet. And that's something that Generation X did not grow up with. So that's a big thing there. People make fun of Trump for saying that he has the best this and the greatest that. And fair game for comedy, right? But he doesn't actually genuinely believe that. I personally believe that he doesn't actually genuinely believe that in his rational mind. What he is he's a salesman. And I know how this works because my dad's a salesman. And he's a paragon of that old boomer mentality that with enough emotional leverage, you can refinance the moon. Which is, it's actually quite true. Actually quite true. Where can I go to sign up to plant trees on top of Göbekli Tepe? That city isn't even that old in the grand scheme of things. It's just one of the first ones to use ultra high quality concrete in its construction that wasn't destroyed since. I'm sick and tired of hearing about that place, and I want the tree roots to grow into and destroy it. The Soviets really went off when they invented Russian roulette. Now that's gambling. Now this is pod racing. Want to know what the Ottoman Turks called Hungary? They call it Makaristan or Magyaristan. I like Hungary better personally. Magyaristan is a little on the nose. They're big fans of history and stuff. The whole thing about the Turk is that the Turk is the most, like, I'm not joking about this, like, listen up. The Turk is the most Aryan of all the races. Yeah, legitimately. But Pan-Aryanism is actually Persian erasure in many ways. So Tehran means the land of the Turks. Iran means the land of the Aryans. Whereas 100 years ago, it was called Persia. That region of the world was called Persia. 300 years ago, it was divided up between like a bunch of like Akunyu, Karakunyu, Ajam, Luristan, Yazd. There's just a variety of different, somewhat Persian and adjacent cultures around there. But the Turks, which mostly Akkunyu and Karakunyu, and Azerbaijan, and Turkmenistan, and Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. Although Uzbeks are complicated, they're very complicated. I wouldn't say the Uzbeks are like purely Turkish. I'd say that they're probably like identify with, just a guess, more Yamnaya culture, an ancient culture, and they might be some of the first, discoverers of Aryanism as a unifying Indo-European rooted anthropology, not anthroposophagy, which is like basically the German concept of the Aryan, which is to say that the Aryan is the Aryan because they were born as a specific race that has the ability to conquer the world. That's anthroposophy. Anthropology is just noting the fact that, yeah, the Yamnaya were in Uzbekistan and they were also in Bosnia. They're very, very responsible for the formation of the Slavic and German culture, as well as many Indo-European influences, Italy, Celtica, etc. And so are the Huns. And before either of them, the Indo-Europeans themselves were just straight up a culture that connected large portions of the world, and that's that. It isn't anything inherent in them. It's the fact that they made those choices, likely because they were pushed out of one area, then pushed out of another. They could have been adventurers, or they could have just been refugees. We don't know. We have no idea. What we do know is that they lived out of their wagons, so they're the original car campers, essentially. RVs are a deeply, deeply European thing in that way. You'd also say the Mongol in his heart yearns for the RV, but I'm sure he's more happy in his yurt. White people got to stop naming their dogs Agamemnon and they cat Shiva. Our ancestors are looking down on us, confused as hell, as why we keep trying to shove the square peg in the round hole and call it innovation. White people will sell smack to teenagers for a decade just to afford moving out of Britain and into Florida. You know what I'm saying? I think it's funny, the whiter you are, the less naturally inclined to be racist you are, or to hate people in general. But if you're some inbred Slav, you might have the inclinations of your typical Asian in regards to social interaction. And if you're like 25 Northern European and like 75% Latin X who works at FedEx and likes to watch SpaceX launches on X while stalking your ex and listening to Sirius XM radio, the more likely you are to say something like, put them all in camps. White people too, if they vote Democrat. Whereas the white people themselves are like, they're getting tricked into this immigration issue. They have been tricked into this immigration issue since Afghanistan. White people were tricked to go into Afghanistan to protect people, to give girls opportunities that they didn't have, and to right an injustice that we viewed. That's why we went to Iraq. That's why we started Desert Storm, Desert Shield. That's why we went to Afghanistan. That's why we did Libya, because we were convinced by the media that Gaddafi was an evil dictator when he wasn't. That's why we did basically everything, is because we were convinced, like say that the Israelis need our help. We were convinced that Saddam Hussein was a bad man and had nothing to do with our own government. H.W. Bush. That's the ultimate curse of white people is we are way too nice, and we should maintain our niceness, but with wisdom. I think the high morality Christian society created this niceness, but the wisdom of Catholicism was lost through modernity, through modern Christianity, like Calvinism, specifically Calvinism, very specifically Calvinism. Calvinism was the Dutch, the English, and the American routes. One of the biggest issues on the entire planet over the last 200 years. You guessed it. So, just a thought. And the reason why Indians love Hitler, since we're talking about that, is because according to Asian standards on leadership, Hitler was a typical leader who exercised every right afforded to him in Eastern society. But it's eternally below the sensibilities of actual Europeans, whose morality is represented in long-suffering Catholicism, which does not purport to possess an infallible standard, but places extreme responsibility on all of its adherents. Thankful also that the U.S. Constitution was written with tyrants, both petty and bold, in mind. And there's fail-safes to protect from genuine tyrancy, which a lot of people think that Trump is. I'd say like 20%. I'd say 20%. Maybe, just maybe, he spent enough time thinking, got the right people advising him to understand that sometimes you do need that little bit of George Washington-style rebellion against power structures and to actually forge your own way in order to be a good American leader. Maybe. I'm not one to tell quite yet. We'll keep our thumb on the pulse and report back on it as the situation develops. But so far, I've been very, very proud of my president. No, I really shouldn't be proud of another man, but I'm proud of the work that he can do for the United States. I'm proud that America, for the first time in our entire history, is moving away from service of genuinely moving away from the service of slave sellers. Okay, so like Lincoln was literally assassinated by this aggrieved, steaming, angry, basically the perfect representation of modern racist Americans. Your really proud Confederate type. I know there's some good Confederates out there. Everybody knows that there's also some Confederates out there that are the sickest and dumbest of all the white people. This John Wilkes Booth character, his aggrievedness caused him to kill Lincoln before Lincoln could actually start moving in the levers of power, to really stop being the dictator of a wartime dictator, which is something that's necessary in many cases, and to instead move towards actual administration. He was killed. Andrew Johnson, one of the worst presidents of all American history, came in, pardoned all of the Confederate generals that orchestrated the massive bleeding into the ground of young Confederate aligned men. And that was that. Nothing was ever really accomplished. The blood of tyrants hasn't watered our tree in very, very, very long. And it feels like with the Trump administration, other than Kennedy, also killed, also shot, also about to hold Israel accountable, Trump is doing the exact same thing of holding Israel accountable. And he's doing it in a much more bold way than Reagan. And what we could very well see is either peace or the tree of liberty being watered with the blood of the tyrants, which, as I said, we'll keep our thumb on the pulse and we'll get back to you on that. You see a lot of keyboard warriors actively cheering on when brown children are murdered with words like, "They could have been a mortar spotter," or "They would have gone up to be a terrorist." But as you observe the men saying these things, you come to find out they're coddled little divas with very low pain tolerances, and they're not men, and they're certainly not paragon of European virtues. So, say what you want about whiteness. That is not a contiguous category that can be well and objectively defined. It is very much in the realms of philosophy, and I've explained it time and time again. that white people, European people, never define themselves as white. First off, it's not white. We're not alabaster. We have peach skin. Some of us have a little bit darker, pale skin, but it's peach and pink. We're not white. First off, first and foremost, we're not called peach and pink. We're called white. Why are we called white? Because Calvinism has deemed that whiteness is an inherent trait of those who have inherited the better position in the world, and darkness is the inherent trait of those who have inherited the worst spot in the world. That's what Calvinism believes. That is the philosophy that makes up a lot of the core of Mormonism's genuinely actively racist beliefs. That is the exact reason why slavery was adopted by a high morality European civilization, because we allowed ourselves to get caught up in that philosophy, the same way as we got caught up in Cartesian philosophy, in Marxist philosophy, in Hegelian dialectics. We got caught up in all of that crap, and it took us way away from the genuine wisdom and knowledge of people who told the truth consistently and wanted better for humanity. It's a philosophical issue. It's not a racial issue. White and black are not a racial issue. They are a philosophical issue. That's where they started, and they continue to be that. And that's exactly why there are so many Hispanics that purport to be white, because they're remembering the encomienda system somehow. I'm not sure how. And you see a lot of Israelis that purport to be white because they have sold slaves and operated with slaves for so long that a lot of them have paler skin, although a lot of them trace their lineages back to Poland and Hungary and Germany and France. Every country that has ever had concentration camps has failed miserably. Why is that, I wonder? For that matter, how come European society had such high morality? And that allowed us the position with which to leverage a global empire, and then through that purchase degrade our morality into a gray, cultureless sludge of what you would call globalism. The globalists. Anyways, wild to find out that a lot of the arm tattoo cops are actually in gangs, deliberately woven through law enforcement. Since we're talking about Israelis, let's talk about something else about it, shall we? Let's talk about it. We all know there's a psyop meant to make gullible citizens venerate police in general, as if they were their local sports team, as if every single one of them, regardless of their actions, were heroes, which is a predeterminist philosophy, right? But to find out, a lot of what Israel has been doing to our cops is the exact same thing they've been doing in Latin America, to Italy regarding the mafia, to domestic gangs. When you get up in the gangs, and don't go saying this willy-nilly, because you will get touched talking like this for real, you find out the heads of those gangs, the COs, entire police departments is in correspondence. The same way as Nayib Bukele in El Salvador lets out MS-13 members and sets up leadership with sweet deals. That it's more of a wrestling match with pre-planned heels and leads than a genuine battle for the protection of the nation. You want to see the end state of Zionism? It looks a lot like LA. Water running dry, gangs everywhere, drugs on it, every corner. Murders every hour. Legalized terrorism at the hands of the state. Communes of smug millionaires funding their own desolation while Hollywood rapes children institutionally right next door. It looks like Brooklyn with air raid sirens randomly going off. Now, as Sam Hyde would say, it's DMV world. And you are not the one operating the booth. So I hope you all enjoyed this episode. I'm sorry for not getting back to you. I've been playing a lot of EU4 recently. I think I'm done with my EU4 run, though. I did the whole start off as a one province minor and rise up to one of the number one powers. I think I got up to number 3 at my highest. Behind Ottomans in Spain, of course. And started off as Sligo Slegacht. and took over Ireland. Took over lots of England, Wales, Northumberland, did the whole vassalization strat. Got the Burgundian inheritance after a lot of prestige farming. I actually got a English PU after going to war with Portugal over it, because Portugal managed to get a personal union with England, and I could not have that. I was my secondary goal for that entire playthrough was to destroy Portugal for having the balls to block me so badly at the beginning of the game, because they were already on the Isles. They were already in England when I tried to do my little, oh, here's the perfect time. They're right at the only part they're right at the only part after the War of the Roses where I can actually get in there and pop a county in, pop a province in Wales, pop a province in Northumberland, and start the, repatriation process of the Celts. And Portugal was right there, and they cucked me real bad. But yeah, I got the Burgundian inheritance. I took over large portions of France. I took over large portions of the Maghreb, and basically all of Sweden, Finland, the Baltic states, and the Teutonic area, Prussia. And yeah, it was fun. Oh, I also got Cumul, the northern Milanese province in Italy. I don't know why I took it. Just took it. I was gonna pop out Milan, but never got around to it. It was maxed out on my diplomatic relationships. Yeah, it from a one province minor to Burgundian inheritance, dominating Western Europe. It was fun, but Spain keeps on smacking me down. At this point in the run through, my army quality and the Irish ideas suck. I kind of wish I would have kept Sligo ideas, because even those were better, and I thought those were bad, than the Irish ideas. The Irish ideas are awful. The only reason why you'd want to play Ireland is for a roleplay game, which was what I was going with. And having a PU with England, I owned all the British Isles. PU with Burgundy, I owned, 75% of France. I started getting coalition and coalition and coalition. My army got smacked down a bunch. Now Spain is, they're really harrowing me. I might just drop that for a while. Shave this gamer beard off my face. Maybe get back with a little bit more frequent content. Maybe get into book readings. Who knows? All right, I went real long on this one, but I hope y'all that stay for every episode till the end enjoyed this little meandering conversation, and hopefully picked up at least one thing from this episode. Otherwise it's just a waste of time. Go watch something else that's actually teaching you stuff. All right, y'all. Cheers.